Starting preparing live stream to live meeting. Well, the sound changed, that's something. Starting preparing live stream to live meeting.
Hi, Gregor.
Hey, Sheila, hold on a second. We're about to start things off here.
Okay, I'm just going to mute my mic then.
Okay. And I don't want to be doing that. I want to be doing this. And welcome to the Liberty Mindset. Come and explore some of the ideas and issues facing our liberty. 2022 is an election year. As libertarians, we ask that you consider voting in the Liberty Mindset. Welcome, and thank you for your time. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Liberty Mindset. We're here live on Callin and YouTube, and this will be our morphed into a podcast on Spotify, Apple, and all the major platforms later. Morpheus said, "You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and you show how deep the rabbit hole goes." This is where the red pill revolution starts, not in the fictional matrix with some incredible effects, but the introduction poses the question, are you ready for the red pill? Well, are you? Today, we talk with John Gusty, co-author of The Red Pill Revolution and devout agorist, according to his bio. Welcome, John, and thank you for joining the Liberty Mindset. Can you expand a little bit on who you are?
Well, first of all, the obligatory thank you for having me on, and I know everyone's time is precious, and so I will treat it as such. Who I am, I've kind of got a split personality. I'm, as we were joking beforehand, before the cameras were rolling, I am forever a 14-year-old kid on a skateboard that loves records and rock and roll, specifically punk rock, and I've just always been. I think, you know, some of this stuff is in our DNA, and I've just always gravitated towards independence. I do not like to be controlled, and that's not in an arrogant way. That's not to say I was a bad kid. I was never in the principal's office growing up. I don't have any sort of a police record. You know, I mean, my friends and that know me, I hope would consider me a very stand-up guy. I just don't want to be controlled. The other side of that coin is I don't want to control anybody else. And so I always gravitated towards, earlier in life, that was kind of the punk rock ethos. I later in life realized that that's actually it's just the essence of anarchy. So at the end of the day, I'm an anarchist. And I say that just like lots of other terms, like conservative, like Christian, like liberal, like a lot of these terms have been co-opted by corporate mainstream media forces and turned into meanings that they are literally the exact opposite of. When I say anarchist, I've been part of a very, very organized anarchist community worldwide for the better part of half of my life. And every single anarchist I've ever met goes by two ethos, and it is no masters, no slaves. And I think that's a really, really easy one for most people to wrap their heads around. I don't want to control you, and I don't want to be controlled. That isn't to say that I think a lot of Fox News and CNN and the rest of the mainstream crap have always portrayed anarchists as like this out of control. Look at the whole, Occupy movement and all of that. That's not anarchy. I've never met any anarchists that behave like that. At the anarchy community I've met have been people who respect. If I'm asking to be an individual and my individual opinions and liberties and rights and whatever, entitlements or whatever are to be respected, then I have to allow that exact same courtesy to my fellow people. Mm-hmm. And so anarchy, the anarchist community is the closest thing I ever found. They actually, strangely enough, behave the way that I would have thought churches behave. But the churches that I have observed and been part of don't behave that way. It usually tends to be exactly the opposite, where it's kind of either selfish driven, or there's some sort of dictatorship doctrine that must be adhered to, that type of thing. But so at the core of everything, I'm an anarchist. I believe that no masters, no slaves. I also believe in the non-aggression principle. There's no appropriate time for me to get aggressive with you or anybody else, unless my literal life is being threatened, or the life of somebody that I care about or am concerned about. That is the only time that aggression is really applicable and proper. And that's not to say that I'm I just turn over for anything. I'm quite the opposite. The favorite body part is my middle finger, and I'm not afraid to use it. And my hope is that if in some small way I might inspire others to use it, because I think one of the biggest what pieces of weaponry we all have in our arsenal is just the simple ability to say no. I'm a huge component. I love that consent. The topic of consent is probably one of my biggest passion topics, and so I'm a big consent guy.
Well, and we're going to get that tested again. Apparently, the Justice Department today filed an appeal to have masks brought back on planes. The Federal Department of Justice, that was one of the things they did this week. Also, they're trying to get us back into the COVID mode as it's looked like in 2021. So we're going to have our opportunity to fly the middle fingers freely all over the world again, I think, coming up. I'm actually surprised it didn't happen during the fall of last year. No, in the book, you have a really nice, there's 11 chapters. I love the way they were formatted, but the middle three, and especially attention, the one on attention, to me was like the meat of the whole issue. Now, part of the joy of it is that as a severely obese old fart, who acknowledges that it is not some magical thing that caused me to get this way. I acknowledge that it is in the long run my fault how I got here. So there was parts of the book were not at all hard to swallow, as it were. That wasn't an intended joke, but it works. And the other part of it was, it's just like, it just reminded me how far I let things go. What are some things you found in becoming this agorist, this anarchist, that you've used your attention to your attention to come back into reality and to become the free thinker you are?
I don't know that I ever wasn't a free thinker. I just don't think that I always understood the source of why I'm a free thinker. And I really do think that it comes down to, we are all wired a certain way, and it's, I think anybody I'm a huge dog owner. I love my dogs. And I think anybody that has ever owned a dog or even a cat, no disrespect to the cat people out there, but they ain't dogs. Anyone that's ever owned a pet, like, I have two dogs and they're so completely different personalities. I joke, I have an all black, long haired German Shepherd, and she is like a Farrah Fawcett circa 1977, just she's beautiful, she's pretty, she knows it, and that's all she needs to get by on. She's not super bright or aggressive. She kind of just stands in the room and goes, I'm pretty, and everyone knows that, and give me some bacon. And I have a husky that is about the same age. They're both females, and my husky is more like Joan Jett. My husky is just like, I'm gonna come up, I'm gonna sniff you, and we're gonna get to know each other, and it's either gonna be good or it's gonna be bad. But so like, we're just wired differently. And so I've always been a free thinker. I don't think I always understood why I was. I just knew that I watched a lot of people around me just fall into line. I've always been fascinated by what people do, why they do it, and what makes them do what they do. And it goes without saying, the last the events of 2020 forward have been just for people like myself, and I would imagine probably a lot of people listening and watching to this, have been just, my goodness, it's been the manifestation of like a lot of things that we've always known and suspected, but then you see it playing out in real life, and it's odd to watch.
Mhm.
You know, and I will say, just for the sake of this conversation, I come to the events of 2020. My wife, Dawn, been married 20 plus years. My wife, Dawn, was years ago, before I met her, diagnosed with what she was told was multiple sclerosis. My wife hasn't taken a step on her own in over 15 years. She's been confined to a wheelchair. And we didn't start playing the virus blood cellular behavior game in March of 2020 like a lot of people have. We've been playing it for 20 plus years for real, because it wasn't about masks or getting on planes or any of that crap. It was about keeping her alive and well. And so I have a lot of well-founded hard opinions on how that whole narrative played out, because from my perspective, I watched a lot of people swallow hook, line, and sinker a well-crafted narrative that was corporately driven, and it's one thing to get sheeple or lemmings, whatever term you want to use, to go from point A to point B, just to move position. But when you're asking them to take part in activities that is actually causing them physical harm and death, in a lot of cases, whole different ball game. So I've got some pretty strong opinions as to what happened, how it went down, and they're not done. They're not done with that narrative by any means. That was, I will say, for anyone that thinks that 2020 was, I don't know, some sort of beta test, I would argue that the late 80s, early 90s with Fauci and the AIDS scam there was I think that was the beta test. And
Well, yeah, I mean, Fauci tried to claim that AIDS was airborne and you could get it from your cereal box. I mean, these were serious things that he put forward back in the
I know.
90s.
Yeah. Well, and let's just, because obviously the topic of viral and viruses is I mean, it's in our vernacular now. We can't not talk about it. But I do want to say, for all intents and purposes of this conversation, I can speak directly to the statement that I'm about to make. So if anyone would like to challenge it, I think that the burden would actually lie upon the challenger. But we don't even have a general consensus on what viruses are. There is no scientific consensus. There are lots of theories. There's lots of video with lots of people pointing to things and floating around in blood and around cells, and they're saying, well, that's a virus. Well, that's a virus. There are an equal number of people that'll go, no, it's not, it's something else, and can explain it quite eloquently. So we don't even know. There isn't the term virus at this point is theoretical and vague at best. No one's ever been able, and this is an absolute truthful statement that I would challenge anybody to challenge.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to challenge it, but I'm not
This is
going
Sheila.
to validate it.
No.
This
is Sheila Dean. She's one of our frequent callers, and have at it, girl. Go say something.
Well, I mean, I'm not here to have a personal rodeo with somebody who has it. They're entitled to their opinions, but I don't necessarily want to authenticate or validate his claims just because he is speaking. And I just wanted to
totally fair. No, that's totally fair. That's why I posed it as a challenge and not a statement. Now I'm making the statement, but I'm also attaching it to a challenge. There has never been any individual, organization, entity of any kind that has ever proven the existence of what they claim to be a virus behaving pathogenically in a natural setting, meaning the human body, and being able to transfer from that human body into another human body and remain behaving pathogenically. That has never been proven by anyone. And we have at the redpillrevolution.com, we have an open, and we are far from the only one that's ever made this challenge. We have an open challenge. If and we want to learn.
Oh, so the Red Pill Revolution is a journal? Is it a publication?
It's a book.
It's a book. It's a book.
Oh, it's a book.
Yes. Yes. And it's also a website where we curate what we believe to be interesting and important pieces of pop culture, quote unquote, news, because I think news in and of itself is an arrogant term. What is news to me might not be news to you. And for any one entity to claim that they are the news, I think is arrogant at best and maybe manipulative at worst.
Well,
but
you've
yeah,
got 15 minutes. That's all I got for this conversation. So if we're gonna get to the red pilliness, let's just go.
Sheila, you're in a mood today.
Well, I'm just letting you know there's a limited time only.
I understand. In reading the book, John, I was interested in some of the things I may have a disagreement with, and I'd like to bring some of those up.
Absolutely, sure.
One of the things on page 122 you talked about, I have a real thing about this, feelings versus thought. Let me get the exact and also there was some hints that you thought that maybe truth was kind of a relative thing, and that one I don't think we disagree on. I just think it was the phraseology that got me. But on 122 it says, however, be careful because we often misuse the word feel when we mean the word think. And for me, those are two totally different things, feeling and thinking. And I think that is part of our societal problem, is that people are so busy feeling they are doing no thinking. And the reason I think that is because from what I understand in my studies of the brain, as it were, the feelings come more or less out of the medulla and the thinking comes more or less out of the cerebellum. So are you indicating that people are mistaking their feelings for clear thinking, or give me a clue on what that really means?
It is kind of a jaggy line to walk, because feelings are pure emotion, whereas thinking can happen devoid of emotion. Like you can form thoughts and thought patterns devoid of emotion. So I think the emotion piece of that is the piece that it's the separator. So sometimes, and my wife and I have a pretty fun back and forth with this very topic, is she tends to think with all her thinking is all emotional, and my thinking is non-emotional, and neither one is right or wrong. It just they take different paths, and so her emotional thinking have different results than my non-emotional thinking, and where I'm using her and I as an example is sometimes my non-emotional thinking could use a bit of emotion to inform a better thought process. So I think they're joined at the hip. But I think the point that we're trying to make in the book, and please keep in mind, there are 5 of us co-authors, and I am the only one of the 5 that is based in the US. The other 4 are UK. So there is a bit of there are some cultural things that needed to be melded, and there are some vernacular things that needed to be melded. And if I would have single-handedly wrote that particular part, where it just represented the way that I would have wrote it, I don't know that I don't know. Well, I still think that it's there on paper. I'm not not proud of what's there on paper, but I may have personally queued it up a little differently, because I think that I think that emotions and thinking are joined at the hip, but the difference is thinking can take place without emotion. I don't think emotion can take place without thinking.
Well, I don't think that we have a choice in whether or not they are separate. They both
Yeah, we can only theorize about any of this.
involuntarily in the ecosystem. It's just one, in a civil society, we really want to have control over our worst impulses. And in context of like what is true, what is false, I find that the challenge today and the environment that we live in is that there's an autocrat saying, okay, my need, my impulse to suppress your rights is greater than the need to do what is lawful or right.
I totally agree with where you're going. I would also add, though, and it kind of gets to another chapter, is yes, that is absolutely happening. Those autocrats are doing that, but we don't need to give them our attention. And it's through our attention that they gain their power to do the very thing that you're describing.
It just so happens that they were doing it in the complete dead of night, and it happened anyway. So whether my attention was on it or not,
I mean, I guess I'm sorry. I didn't clarify.
Accountability.
I didn't clarify myself, and that's on me. I'm sorry. By attention, I mean acknowledging their very importance at all. I don't. I'll give you a good example. A lot of people will refer to whoever is current CEO of Corp USA Incorporated as our president, and I don't. Personally, I don't have a president. That's referring to a commercial entity, and I'm not ruled over by any commercial entities that I haven't consented to. So I haven't consented to that commercial entity, and so by giving them our attention, I mean I'm even acknowledging their very purpose or value at all.
Well, it's still a little circular. We're dealing with the World Economic Forum. They don't care what you care about. And
I don't care that they exist because they don't affect my existence one iota.
Well, I mean, they do affect my existence. When I have to spend a large chunk of my week combating government mandates for national identity initiatives so that we don't have a goddamn checkpoint state using my telephone, that's a problem for me. And how it's not a problem for you is interesting. But by and large, everybody else is dealing with the World Economic Forum and bad policy, bad AI policy, and I'm not above it. I'm not above inflation. I'm not above other problems that are here in the real world. And unfortunately, we're not all going to migrate to Colombia and live in the weeds with an anarchist collective, dude. That's not going to happen.
I don't know that I'd want to live in an anarchist collective either, and I don't. I actually live in Nashville, Tennessee, and there's lots of there is lots of metropolis and other things around me. So I don't want to give the impression.
I also happen to have a quibble, because just because it has an anarchist title on it doesn't mean it means what we think it means. So there gets some our Orwellian grist. There's some Orwellian gravy on the whole anarchist thing.
Yeah, and I actually consider myself an agorist, which is, it's maybe a subset of anarchy, but it's a little more refined subset of anarchy. So just consider
whether it's refined or not, I need to explain that after living in the Pacific Northwest for 10 years.
No, yeah, you're in the battle zone for sure.
Those are anarchists. They are anarcho-communists. They're they say they're anti-capitalist, but they're just black bloc anarchists. They're destructive as hell, and they don't care about what I care about, and they think I'm a bad person because I stop at stop signs.
If there is any individual claiming to be an anarchist that is messing with any individual or that individual's property, then I would argue that's not that's exactly the opposite of what an anarchist is.
Well, then there should be, Mr. Red Pill, an anarchist convention quartered in that area.
There is. It's called an
Happen
Acapulco, and it happens
and
every
try to
year in
convince one
Acapulco,
another
Mexico.
what anarchism should and should not be. Because when it's at the head of the Libertarian Party, it can't go forward. We don't represent anarchy.
No, I understand. And there is a convention. It's called an Acapulco. It takes place every year and has for many, many years in February every year in Acapulco, Mexico. I've been there, been an attendee many times. In fact, I've had a chance to sit and chat with people such as Ron Paul and had just wonderful exchanges of ideas and information. So it is, you are, if you're in the Pacific Northwest, you are definitely, I can understand why you feel the way you do. And I completely, I trust me, I get it, because I've got a ton of dear friends that live up there or have lived up there. And it's a different bet. Please understand that the world that you live in is a very different world than what I live in here in Middle Tennessee. And I recognize that. And I see people behaving badly, and I see people behaving badly under banners that I wish they wouldn't. I wish, honestly, to just, and maybe this strikes a chord with you in a positive way or not, but at the end of the day, man, I've been conservative my entire life. And I say conservative as when you take things like rights, liberties, entitlements, personal property, like I'm very conservative in giving any of that away to a third party. That is the actual meaning of conservative, and the meaning of liberal is you'd be very liberal in giving those things away to a third party. So I look at like anybody. When I see somebody who identifies as a Republican saying that they're conservative, that's offensive to me, because they're not they're literally the dictionary definition.
You have 2 minutes with me, and then I've got to go.
Okay,
you have 2 minutes. What are your actions? I mean, being offended is something that the left does, when they get up after they eat their cereal, and maybe 4 times before they eat the cereal. Okay, being offended, my anger is not precious. There's a lot of competing anger on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
You follow me? Like,
absolutely.
A lot of competition for your dirty little anger, mine, and then 8 gazillion people trying to get a like or something on the internet. What makes your anger so special?
First of all, I'm not angry. I sure hope I haven't come off as an angry person. I'm not angry at all. I think anger is kind of, anger is
my bad. It's anger. I just kind of interchanged the two. Offended.
Okay. So what makes my offense different than any other offense? Is that your question?
Yeah. What's the flavor of your savor?
I try to take what offends me and channel it through creative and positive ways, and in my particular instance, I choose to make content. And when I'm not making content, I curate content, and I try my best to put that content in the paths of people that I think it might be useful for. That way, instead of being some sort of a Karen or Nancy online pointing fingers telling people what they should or shouldn't be doing, I don't do that at all. In fact, I don't even have a social media presence. I just don't. It's kind of narcissistic to me.
I have a social media presence, and I do the exact same thing. I gotta go. That's a good point.
All right. Well,
thanks, Sheila.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
I'm going to bring on Leon now. He's a caller who is waiting in the queue.
Yeah.
Okay, Leon, you should be able to unmute yourself. I can't hear you, but I know you're unmuted. There we go.
There we go. I heard some.
Now try it. Leon, are you there? Top of your status bar, red microphone, right click and allow. Nope. Okay, he hung up or he jumped. Um, and boy, Sheila was a firecracker today.
You guys, in all due respect, I hope nothing. I wasn't trying to
You
offend her.
didn't.
Yeah. No, I can appreciate her passion, and I really, really do understand. Man, I've got some dear friends that live in the Portland area,
Well, she
and
actually doesn't anymore. She has left. But I don't know how
but
much she wants me to share.
yeah, no,
Um,
but I know that I can tell you it's like people who live in LA. It's like it's a whole. I don't think most people walking the street understand what is happening in those epicenters of it's just boot. I mean, there that whole Pacific Northwest has a boot on it, like unlike most
oh yeah,
areas.
well actually I live in Oregon. I live just south of Portland in Hillsboro. And I relocated from San Diego, California. So, it's just a different world up
Yeah.
here. Vlad left too. I was about to bring him in. Um, well, one of the things, that and back to the book, because like I said, it was really fascinating. And the book is A Red Pill Revolution for anybody who's joined later. Oh, and Leon's willing to try again here. Hold on.
Leon, round two. Here we go.
Yeah. Okay, I heard
Yes.
clicks.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Hey,
Okay. I was trying, and it's always about the technology for some stupid reason. Anyway, here's this is my issue with what was said. I am a believer that there are primary emotions and secondary emotions, and the primary emotions are things like fear, which are instinctual and you don't really think about choosing them. And then the secondary emotions are things like happy and sad and anger and other emotions that you actually have to think about something for at least a microsecond and then choose. So when you tell me that feelings are a different type of thinking, I can agree with that. But my problem is that I don't have to think that way. And if I am thinking that way, it's because I was trained to think that way. And that's where the problem is.
Oh, I personally agree with you.
So I'm not willing to say that people think using a specific part of their brain as a matter of, what's the word I'm looking for? As a matter of that's just the way they are. They were taught how to do that. They were taught to think in terms of how their feelings are approached. And they don't understand that at certain times they need to use feelings and at certain times they need to not use feelings. And that's where our problem becomes. We have to retrain ourselves so that we can think in both ways at the appropriate times. And we should think in both ways at all times.
I actually agree with exactly. I mean, I think Leon kind of nailed it. I would add to that. I think we're taught not to think in a lot of instances. The only thing, Leon, that I would maybe disagree with you kindly on is I don't think that there's any. I personally don't think that there's any difference between you identified fear as I think you used the word primary feeling, and I don't think fear is any different than any other feeling. I mean, I think I will point to the events of 2020 onward. There's a lot of people choosing fear there, and that's just one example. That's just one example, but I do think you can choose to be afraid. And I mean, I can't speak for anybody but myself, but in my life I've watched a lot of people choose to be afraid. So I do think fear is a choice.
And I will agree with you on with the caveat that fear is an initial response through the concept of evolutionary use. We have an instinct to fear things for a specific amount of time until we can identify them. And at that point, then it becomes a choice. Once we have identified that there's a threat, we can either choose to be afraid of it, or we can choose not to be afraid.
Yeah, I think you're describing the whole process of understanding. Yeah, once you have understanding, then maybe that fear turns to something else.
Well, you want to talk about the recent endemic issue. When I'm going to just state, I had it before it was cool. Everybody was still calling it racist when I had it. We did not call it a pandemic at that point. I had it before the Chinese New Year thing happened. I had it when Maxine Waters was screaming that it was racist not to attend Chinese New Year because Donald Trump was saying that we need to do something about this now, otherwise it's going to get out of control. So I, having the problem and having been following the problem when it broke in November of 2019, I went and said, well, what is this? How does it affect people, and what can be done about it? Almost immediately, before it was a huge issue, I said, what's going on? And I noticed that the media was portraying it as something that was incredibly deadly and that was going to wipe out the population. And then I noticed that I can't remember his name, the guy who was part of the epidemiologist who was part of the team, who led the team, that maybe it wasn't epidemiology. The guy who figured out the potential statistics at Occidental College released a thing, got his media 15 minutes of fame, got called out because people pointed out one specific thing, that it was only discovered in Wuhan, China. That's not necessarily where it originated. That's not necessarily when it originated. It just happened to be discovered there at that particular time. So it probably had been all over the world already. And there were a lot of people who were already exposed, and we could not really account for that in the discussion of what the statistics were going to be. At that point, he goes, oh, yeah, you have a point. He changes the math, goes back to the drawing board, changes the math, and says, oh, I was totally wrong about this. Ends up in front of Parliament, because he's at Occidental College, which is in the UK, for people who don't know. He ends up in front of Parliament testifying that his numbers were wrong by orders of magnitude. And it was going to be more like 50,000 people dead, not 5 million. And at that point, the media stopped talking about him and stopped talking about any other statistics that were coming out, because all of the people who were putting out statistics trying to get their 15 minutes of fame had all gone back to the drawing board and said, oh yeah, we forgot about that.
And I would argue that is the case, because that whole narrative was rooted in the germ theory. And any one of us right now can go to Wikipedia and look up germ theory. And the second word there is theory. It has not been proven. Back to an earlier statement that I made, it has not been proven that any of the, again, we don't even have a consensus on what a virus is. And so all of this stuff is theoretical. And so these people who are throwing out statistics on this stuff are throwing out statistics on theories, not anything that is scientifically provable or even mathematically provable. And so I think that's why that particular that part of that narrative that you illustrated quite well, it fell apart and got buried real quickly, because I think the people, I don't know, I'm a content creator, I'm also a writer, and so I understand narratives, and I'm constantly, I guess just personally and privately amused that the people that are crafting these narratives at the highest of levels, if we want to give them that much credit, they're not real good writers. They a lot of these narratives have holes and unexplainable plot twists, and it's not creatively put together very well.
When you play the same record over and over and you forget to pick up the needle to reset where you started, you're going to end up with holes in the narrative, because you're going to have that scratch that goes across everything. So it's going to go, this is dangerous, 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 okay, you get the idea. So that's
totally
the problem. They stayed on the fear mongering narrative.
Well, and because fear, like you mentioned, fear is a huge weapon. Fear is super important, and I think that's why you led with that. You identified fear as like you used the word primal. It's like fear is an enormous weapon, and they know it.
And use it as a tool.
Yeah,
I worked in the law enforcement industry, and if I wasn't using fear, I wasn't doing my job.
Yeah,
I literally would go to somebody, scare the Jesus out of them to force their compliance to what I was wanting them to do. I was a rent-a-cop. It wasn't like I was arresting people.
Yeah. But man,
I was the boot.
Leon,
and I used fear the boot.
You just said something that I think is so freaking huge. You used fear to get compliance. And man, that is that recipe right there. Fear to get compliance. That I wish more normies understood that equation. In order to get compliance, well, the fastest way to get compliance is through fear. I mean, you could get compliance through respect, but fear is a much more effective, and you're going to net more through fear. And man, I appreciate you even uttering those words, because I think it's a huge piece. It's definitely a huge piece of the book.
It actually is. And one of my favorite things is I love the fact that you pulled out an ant's life in that book, talking about the grasshoppers and controlling the ants. And
you're talking about the documentary, The Ant's Life?
Yeah, The Ant's Life, the documentary by Pixar. Yeah, no, and you know, one of the chief grasshopper has to educate his minions that if they don't control the ants, you know, if they don't keep control of the ants and keep them afraid, then they lose, because, and as the end of the movie iterated, hopefully I'm not giving anything away for anybody, but you know, if you're outnumbered 101, you know, volume does have a certain amount of winning.
Gamers call this a zergling rush.
Yes. Well,
yeah. And you know what? That is it. That whole concept, like, we all individually have that power to say, again, I sum it up in just the power to say no. But we have the power to, you know, there's a lot of us ants out there. And I just don't think enough of us ants realize the power that we have.
Leon, can I get you to let Brady have a chance?
Certainly.
Hey, Leon. Hey, thank you, Leon. I appreciate, man. Thanks for bringing up some awesome points and contributing to this. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now there we go. All right, Brady, you should be able to unmute yourself now. Yeah, sorry, IDK, maybe. I don't know why you couldn't hear Leon. We could hear him fine. Brady, are you still there? And I'm Brady. If you unmute yourself, you can talk. But until then, justice is something you talked about, and there is mention of forgiveness of past wrongs, or even not worrying about what happened in the past, which I have a certain amount of trepidatious respect for. I really think that blaming people for everything,
well said,
you know, is you know, blaming people, blaming the past for everything now. Yes, it had an influence, but blaming it is really not, you know, not a way to go. But my question is how do we have or promote what is actual, and I don't mean the current definition of justice, I mean the 1825 Noah Webster definition of justice, meaning something where a person is actually responsible and you know, is for their own actions. How do we balance the idea of you know, walking away from the terrible things, because there are terrible things that have happened,
Yes.
I mean, I think history is important because we have to acknowledge those things so we don't do them again. But I'm a little concerned about a lot of folks taking the direction of saying, well, just forgive me and we'll move on. Where, I'm as a Christian, yeah, forgiveness is part of it, but repentance has to be part of that whole
Yeah.
thing.
No,
So
absolutely.
where do you find justice in an agoristic society?
I first of all, fantastic question. It's actually not just a question, it's a whole topic. I mean, we could take up a whole hour on just this thing alone.
Yeah, we can come back again sometime then.
Yeah. But justice, well, let me start here. Would you agree that currently, like the current pop culture, the way that it exists right now, is it a fair statement to say we might be marinating a little bit in narcissism?
No, it's a fair statement to say we're drowning desperately in narcissism.
All right. So that being said, I think justice is not immune to narcissism. And I say that because I could I'll give a very real I won't reveal names or anything like that, but I'll use myself as an example. I have a past relationship with a woman that did not go well and ended poorly, and there was a child involved in that relationship, and although I hated the fact that my child was reduced to a commercial entity at that point, I didn't know legally and lawfully what I knew now to be able to navigate the system the way that I would do it now. But thankfully, the system spat it out that I ended up with custody of my child. And the individual with whom it ended ugly with continued to be ugly. And Maya, who became my current wife, said that relationship, she was the one that grounded me. She said all of that anger was financially driven, and that when my child turned 18, that anger would go away. And lo and behold, when my child turned 18, that individual stopped being so angry because there was no financial gain there. And I had a lot of I can't tell you the number of Jerry Springer level scenarios that I wished had not entered my life and that of my child, but I could not keep
on Jerry Springer.
But I couldn't keep it away. I did my best, but I couldn't keep it away because there was somebody else in the equation that was acting that way. So I wanted justice. And for a short period of my life, I got consumed with wanting justice until I realized that what I was doing was very self-centered, narcissistic. Like, I wanted justice.
Well, it sounds like, and this is an assumption on my part, it sounds like you wanted revenge versus justice.
Well, again, I was going to get there because justice and revenge have a very unique relationship with each other. They're very intertwined, and I think the only thing that separates them is the narcissism. And so, justice can be very self-centered and narcissistic, and turn into revenge. A much healthier path that I took with that individual was letting go of all of my anger and need for justice and revenge, and let the human experience play out. And it is cliched, but what goes around comes around. It more often than not turns out to be true. It's proven true to me. And I just tried my best to behave like a good father and a good friend and a good neighbor and a good role model, and a good spouse, and even a good ex-spouse. And I can now sit back and look and feel quite confident that because I did not take justice or revenge into my own hands, it took its natural course and played out in the healthiest way possible. And so I think justice is a huge topic, and I think that it is tied at the hip with revenge, and I think it's also tied at the hip with narcissism. And so when we talk about justice, I really think we need to approach it from those angles, because there's a lot of things that demand justice culturally. There's a lot of things that demand justice personally. There's a lot of things that demand justice in a group setting, but it's all different. And I don't think it's one like overarching topic. I just think that it's a unique justice / revenge is a huge aspect of the human experience, and a lot of us get caught up in it. And man, I can get thinking on a topic, and I can fall into that whole, I want revenge, I want justice, I want all that. But you know the feeling, when you get like that, and it's not a healthy feeling, it's not a loving feeling, it's not a positive feeling. And I don't know, it's something I just think as a topic, as a whole, we need to be careful of, because it is also very emotion driven. And that emotional aspect of it just needs to be recognized, and we need to approach it with caution, because I have heard people that I otherwise normally respect as like logical, normal thinking, respectful fellow adult human beings, like something will come out of their pie hole like, well, that person needs to be put in jail for that. And it's like, you're talking about throwing somebody in a cage, and who's throwing them in the cage, and who owns the cage, and all that stuff. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, they might blurt that out there as like justice, but it's like, it's not, it's revenge or narcissism.
Well, and there is that the whole revenge versus justice thing. I guess Brady couldn't figure out how to get his microphone working or something. Okay. Anyway, but yeah, no, because a lot of people want to scream for justice. I mean, that's the latest thing. We have social justice, that wonderful new phrase that we have to put up with, that means that we're going to give everything to everybody else to make it right, except for my stuff.
Yeah, and who's administering the justice? That's kind of where I'd like to kind of start that conversation. Who administers the justice? Is it you? Is it me? Is it someone else? And I mean, who?
That's an interesting discussion that the book talks a little bit, doesn't talk about necessarily, and I'm just kind of curious. In an agoristic society, I understand, because you're talking, agorism just means an open place, right? I mean, that's from the Greek agora.
Agora, yeah. It was actually coined by Samuel Konkin
in the 70s. I read that. So the rest of our audience is familiar with it, but
and he was
a libertarian movement.
Yeah, he was kind of the father of the whole libertarian.
And again, it's based on some of the writings of von Mises.
Yes.
Which is, by the way, that's a book I'm going to start reading, and we'll probably talk about on this show. I just downloaded it, but it's and that's an interesting thing in an agoristic society where you're trying to avoid having authority, where you're trying
to no, not trying to avoid authority, trying to avoid authority by declaration. If I consent to an authority, and that's where I think people and maybe our first caller didn't quite understand my nuance to this, is I'm not against authority. I'm against authority by declaration. For me to just come in and say I'm in charge. Yeah, I'm in charge. No, not so much. But if you and me and a bunch of other people, let's just say we buy, I think she used the analogy of like living on some sort of like commune or whatever. Let's just say we bought a bunch of land, and we set up and we organized there, and we said, look, to live in this society, here are the rules. And we'll vote on them, and we consent to them. And there might be one or two people that go, you know what, I don't really consent to that stuff. And then it would be up to us as that society to go, well, you can still coexist with us, but we're going by these rules.
Right.
Or
So you
you
actually,
can,
so
or
you
you
acquiesce
leave.
to play by the rules,
Yeah,
or you
yeah,
leave.
or you leave, and that's fair. It's like you chose to be. Ultimately, we all chose to be there, and if you and if we organize in such a way that somebody doesn't agree with it, they have the choice to leave, and that is fair. And I think that in essence is what an agoristic society looks like. Is it's not against authority, it's against just self-declared authority. And you know, if 100 people all agree, okay, this is how we're going to do things, and you know, Gregor's the authority, then we've agreed to it, we've consented to it, and that's different. Gregor being my authority that I consented to is different than Gregor declaring he's my authority and trying to make me do things that I didn't consent to.
Right. And one more thing I wanted to get to, because we are kind of running out of time, and we're gonna go over 1 o'clock, but um 2 o'clock Pacific time. One of the things I wanted to get into is a word that's used throughout the book, and sovereignty.
Yes.
And one of the things I've been pounding, preaching, espousing on this podcast is the concept of sovereignty. We spent the first 15 episodes, the first 12 episodes, going over the 1791 Bill of Rights, the first 10. And one of the things I kept coming back to is how each one of these established the fact that in this country, for the first time, there's a book called The 5,000 Year Leap, which talks about this quite well, that for the first time in history, sovereignty was not given to a high priest or to some sort of higher office, king. The presidency does not have sovereignty over us according to the Constitution. We are individuals. We give them a certain amount of authority to function based on the Constitution, which has long since been abused and taken over, and I acknowledge that. But how does sovereignty work? What is sovereignty to you, and why is it? No, here's a question: what is sovereignty to you, and why is it important? And then we'll close.
Well, first of all, I don't think sovereignty can be given. Sovereignty just is. We are sovereign. I mean, my dogs are sovereign. The plants or trees out there. I think sovereignty just is, and I think sovereignty is something I think the only human movement that we can do against sovereignty is to exercise it. We can exercise our sovereignty, and that's the essence of why I'm attracted to agorism. Is that's what it's all about. Is I am sovereign, and I will join the island of Gregor, and I will consent to Gregor being the authority, but I'll do it under my terms. And if the island of Gregor and Gregor's rule doesn't suit my needs, then I know I have the option to leave. And so it's just that I think it's kind of the way that most of us might run their homes. Is you are welcome in and you are welcome to leave. But it's you know what I mean. It's like there's an open front door and there's an open back door, and it just has to be. But it's all consent driven, and so sovereignty to me is kind of the starting point where we all start at. We are already sovereign. One of the annoying things about that term is I think most people know that term through the term sovereign citizen, which is an oxymoron. You can't be sovereign and a citizen at the same time, because a citizen is a commercial term, and if you were identifying yourself via a commercial term, you're certainly not sovereign. So and that's pro tip, that's how a lot of policemen will trip you up. If you identify yourself as a sovereign citizen, you are identifying yourself as someone that doesn't know what you're talking about. You are the equivalent of someone walking into a firearms store and going, "Show me your assault rifle section."
Yes.
It's like you immediately identify yourself as someone that doesn't know what they're talking about firearms. So so sovereignty to me is just, it's kind of an absolute. There's no gray area there. We are all sovereign. Everything that is alive is sovereign until somebody comes along and says that it's not. And isn't that the eternal fork in the road / challenge / battle?
Yeah. Well, we're going to stop right there. That's perfect. And thank you, John, for coming to the Liberty Mindset.
Absolutely, buddy.
Taking the red pill to be terrifying and rewarding experience. And reading the book, much of it is resonated not only as true but necessary for my freedom. The people running the game or the vending machine, as it's often referred to in the book, count on our lack of attention. One quote from the book, which is one of my favorite authors of all time, Sun Tzu: "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." We can also subdue the enemy without fighting simply by exercising our sovereignty without violence, by simply seizing our autonomy and becoming ungovernable. You can be the change. Check the links in the description for some free bonus material from the Red Pill Revolution website. And as always, seek the truth and stay curious. Okay, so we are now off of that. How do I get out of being live on YouTube? That's what